Well, good morning, everybody. I was invited to speak today on humanitarian work in otology. And this talk will be about 30 minutes. The talk is divided into more or less 3 sections. One is just discussing the history of humanitarian work at House Institute, what we've been doing since about 2006, and just discussing some of the fundamentals of humanitarian work in training and also in practice, and tying it into Acgme goals, core competencies, things like that for trainees. And then we're going to discuss a study that was done by one of our fellows who just graduated, Ann Maxwell, and myself on reviewing our fellow experience with humanitarian training in 2nd year of fellowship. And then we're going to talk about some future goals and some plans that we have for moving forward with not only our own training of residents and fellows in humanitarian otology, but also some worldwide goals that we have from the House Institute in global health, and what we'd like to encourage otologists and neurotologists in our specialty to plan and have as an aspiration for their careers. We'd like to encourage the participation of all practicing otologists in some humanitarian program. And we have a rollout for that down the line that will be coming out, but we'll talk about that briefly at the end of this talk. So hopefully you can all see the slides. Several years ago, we kind of tentatively or initially reviewed our experience with humanitarian work and presented this at the IFOS meeting in 2013. And since then, we've had many more fellows go on humanitarian experiences, and so we decided to do a formal review. But I'll start by just reviewing some of the fundamentals of why we would want to do humanitarian work, why we might want to formalize it in our training programs, and what the benefits are for both trainees and for those who are being served. So since 2006, actually, Joni Doherty was the first House Fellow to go on a humanitarian trip to Ethiopia. And the following year, I went to Ecuador, and since then, we've had many trainees go. And we've worked, historically, worked with Richard Wagner in Global ENT Outreach in working on developing sustainable projects. And from there, we've also branched out into the greater community worldwide of humanitarian work. And we've had trainees work with some of the British groups in Nepal and many other programs, such as Jim Saunders, Mayflower Medical Outreach, and others. So this has been going on for almost 15 years. When we look at the Acgme core competencies, the primary one we kind of felt that humanitarian work would support is professionalism. The fact of you have to make decisions about limited resources, about ethical decisions, about what to do in a limited resource environment when follow-up may not be good. But actually, Ann, our fellow, found out that through our study that actually most of the Acgme core competencies are supported and developed by humanitarian work. And so when you look at actually every of these separate areas of the core competencies, we find that in almost every area, fellows develop abilities and develop their skills in these core competencies. Because if you look, basically you're separating a limited resource environment, such as a humanitarian sustainable project, versus a resource-rich environment, such as the developed world. And those two environments are very different, and they require a different thought process and a different practice process. So it's actually been a little bit of a surprise to us that we thought this would be encouraging just this single core competency of professionalism and sort of some areas in that, but we've actually found that it's been much broader than that. Professionalism, as we kind of thought about it, would be that humanitarian training would allow fellows to understand like a larger system of healthcare worldwide, especially more along the lines of the WHO and how they think about health, hearing health and hearing disease and ear disease, because it's just something that to most of us in the developed world is fairly foreign and is not something that we deal with on a regular basis. I mean, we teach people that 5% of the world's population has chronic otitis media with at least a 45 dB airline, in at least one ear, but until you actually go out in the world and see what that looks like, that's just a number. And you start seeing, more of this as you go out into the world. It teaches compassion, respect for others, sensitivity to a diverse patient population, also ethics. Which cases should you do in a resource-limited environment? Where should you focus your efforts when you have patients coming in with a variety of complaints? What kind of surgery should you be doing? What surgery should you not be doing? So these are all important things for fellows and trainees to learn. And I think it's important to make a distinction at this point between simply, a humanitarian trip where you just go on a single trip and you might do certain surgeries and you come back and say, well, I went on a trip and I did some surgeries as a resident or a fellow. We're talking about sustainable projects. And so we'll talk a little bit about what the definition of sustainability is and how that ties into training both people that go and also people that are local to the project. And so we're talking about a larger thing here than simply going and repairing cleft palates or cleft lips in a country and then coming back. We're talking about a much larger goal for training and learning. So we decided in our fellowship to actually formalize humanitarian training into the second year. And this is actually written into our fellowship paperwork, our application to Acgme. And so we felt that it was, the goals would be to not only develop the core competency of professionalism in others, but to also encourage collegialism, responsibility for those that are in developing nations, fostering a lifelong desire to educate. And I think our study shows that actually participating in these trips does make it more likely for trainees to actually be going on more humanitarian trips. And our specialty as a whole of neurotology is very, very much oriented on teaching. Even when doctors are in private practice, they're usually in some sort of teaching role, whether it's a clinical faculty position or having residents rotate through their practice or whatever it may be, pure academic role. Neurotologists are often involved in teaching. And so, but we also want to encourage lifelong humanitarian aspirations in our specialty. And how to accomplish this with limited goals and limited time. So as I mentioned, we made formal written guidelines. These were approved by our fellowship board. Fellows always have to be supervised by an attending level physician, surgeon on these trips. Wherever they go, they have to be in an environment where they're not doing this on their own. And we also require a written and oral experience, oral report after the experience. We actually require the fellows to write up a report for the AAO bulletin. We encourage them to give an oral report at the humanitarian committee of the AAO, and any other kinds of reports they'd like to do. But we at the minimum we request that they do those reports. When talking about which surgeries to do in environments that are limited, Jim Saunders back in 2018 edited a clinics issue with a variety of humanitarian topics, and I encourage you. This is it's the volume 51 of clinics from 2018, and that volume has a lot of articles about humanitarian work in otology. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this area, to go to that issue and read as much of that as you'd like. Adam Master, one of our fellows, and Richard Wagner and I looked at basically kind of what are the most common surgeries that we do and how do we do them. And as it turns out, which is no surprise, the majority of the surgeries that we do in these projects are chronic ear disease. So we're doing tympanoplasty with mastodectomy, canal wall up, canal wall down, although with cholesteatoma, we're almost always doing canal wall down because these patients have limited follow-up. And we are doing some otosclerosis surgery, especially in patients with bilateral disease who have limited ability for hearing aid fitting, for example. They may not have the ability to get a hearing aid, and so you may be providing that patient really the only chance to have improved hearing in at least one ear with a stapedectomy. So these surgeries of chronic ear disease and otosclerosis make up the large majority of surgeries performed in otology in a humanitarian setting. I like to say that if you're doing a cochlear implant on a humanitarian otology project, that project has probably reached the point where it's no longer a humanitarian project. It's uncommon to do cochlear implants in these settings. I know that Susan Cordes and Others have written papers about what level of surgery should you be doing in these environments. But if a project reaches the point where you're doing a cochlear implant, you've trained that local staff and the local doctors to a level where they can do that level of service. You've either done an excellent job with your humanitarian development, which is great, and or you're doing it in a situation where the local expertise is probably beyond needing more training. So we don't usually do cochlear implants in humanitarian otology trips because simply there has to be a huge amount of infrastructure for rehabilitation and so forth. And so certainly though, in a situation where there was an early cochlear implant program already in place in a country that was developing, then providing training in that and support in that would be appropriate. But simply going and doing cochlear implants that were donated, for example, for a trip would be considered, in my opinion, not appropriate for a project in its early stages. These are just some of the countries that our trainees have gone to, and you can see that that most of these involve chronic otitis media with or without some stapes exposure. And these are, when we say chronic ear disease, we're talking about draining ears with significant tympanic sclerosis, fixed ossicular chains, sometimes limited ability to do ossiculoplasty because of the amount of tympanic sclerosis. So these are very severely diseased chronic ears in many cases that we're dealing with, and sometimes often we're trying to do things to help these patients avoid complications, especially with long-term otorrhea. So you can see the number of countries here. Since this, in addition to this, we've had more than one fellow go to Nepal to actually different programs that are supported by British programs. We've had more than one fellow go to Nicaragua with Jim Saunders, and we've had a number of other countries involved. I'm sure this will expand, and we'll talk a little bit about why we like it to expand. Just show some images from just a few different programs. This is from El Salvador, which is actually, the incidence of otosclerosis is extremely high, or the prevalence, I should say, is extremely high in El Salvador. In fact, if you see a conductive loss in Los Angeles and the patient's from El Salvador, it's very likely that they have otosclerosis, and because the prevalence is so high. So in El Salvador, there's actually quite a bit of otosclerosis surgery. Many of these patients there have otosclerosis and something else. They may have otosclerosis and Meniere's disease, or they have otosclerosis and chronic ear disease. And so it's a difficult environment for that. This is Mark Lorenz, one of our fellows who went to Nepal with the British Nepal Otology Service. There's actually another British program called Ear Aid Nepal. Both those programs have actually built ear hospitals in Nepal now. And those are up and running. They're very mature programs. They've been working there for years. These are great environments for trainees to go. They're supervised by attending level doctors. They're training local physicians, local surgeons. It's a great opportunity. And they bring back amazing pictures and amazing stories about their time there. Just some images here. This is Adam Master, also who went to Nepal. This is Catherine Noonan, who I think she went to Nicaragua with Jim. She'd been there before, and she trained with Jim Saunders at Dartmouth, and she had gone to Nicaragua. And so Jim's program in Nicaragua is probably one of the preeminent programs, kind of a model for what we'd like to accomplish with a sustainable program. They've done amazing work with the local Ministry of Health. They've developed a deaf school for deaf children. And they've done a lot of work with the local governments, and just done an amazing job. And unfortunately, COVID has, among other things, has put a wrench in humanitarian efforts, just simply because a lot of countries now are closed to foreigners. We actually had a trip planned this year to El Salvador that we had to cancel because they actually put a travel stop on foreigners, El Salvador non-nationals, and then COVID started getting severe. So right now with the COVID situation, humanitarian work, I wouldn't say is completely on hold, but for most purposes it is. And so we're kind of focusing on some education things now, but until this settles down. But it's definitely affected the ability for us to do humanitarian work in the short term. John Goddard in Cambodia. This is Alex Bean. I think he went to Samoa, American Samoa, with Richard Wagner. Just another place where sometimes there's some very severe complications of otitis media that have to be managed. I know of at least one story of physician, I think it was Chuck Weingarten, had to fly from Chicago to Samoa to do a surgery for a complication of chronic otitis media in a child. I mean, there's some situations where there's really just an urgent need in certain situations for an otologist in some of these settings. So what are the challenges with training in humanitarian work? There's a number of them. Time away is always an issue. We have limited, trainees have limited time for rotations, and taking time away, do they have to take, vacation? Do we give them time? These are hard questions because we have a limited training time. Malpractice issues, although generally what we do with malpractice in a situation like it's a foreign country is we always operate under the local physician of record. So we're always assisting. And that, for the most part, makes that not too big of a challenge. Some countries have different requirements for reporting of your training and documentation, but we always operate under the local surgeons as the physician of record. So that's how we approach that. But there is some concerns. There's some concerns with, for example, some countries treat medical liability statutes more as a criminal statute rather than a civil one. And certainly in those situations, you'd have to make a judgment as to whether you want to have that kind of exposure. But this is a challenge. It's a concern, and it's always something we think about. Vaccinations, medical evacuation, what if people get sick in a foreign country? These are simply issues related to travel, longer term travel in foreign countries, especially places that are remote. We think about infectious exposures. I think it behooves any program, if you're setting up a program, you need to think about what happens with like needle stick exposures, what kind of prophylaxis you might do, what is the prevalence of infectious disease in the country you're working in. These things need to be thought about and planned in advance. So, our general rule when I've worked with organizations is we take it very seriously. So if there is an exposure, we get it evaluated essentially like we would in the US. We do testing of the patient and the doctor, and we give prophylaxis if needed. And it's just something that needs to be thought about in advance so you have a plan. So if something like that does happen, it doesn't happen often, but if it happens in a certain situation, you want to make sure you think about that in advance. And also there's been problems historically with using humanitarian training in counting surgical cases for residency and fellowship. The RRC has traditionally not really allowed these cases to be counted. And I think that's probably something that needs to change. I mean, we're talking about 1 to 2 weeks in training, but I think it should be thought of as simply, if we formalize the training under our training programs, then it should be considered simply potentially just another site for training. And so I think that we need to strongly encourage the RRC to allow these cases to be counted on case logs. And so kind of with that as a background, I wanted to go over just a few slides from our retrospective study of our training. Anne Maxwell, pictured here, was instrumental in doing this. This is an IRB approved study where we polled our former fellows and did a number of questionnaires and follow-up questionnaires with our fellows to see exactly what benefits were obtained and sort of some of the summarizing things that related to core competencies. How did core competencies get affected by their humanitarian experience, and what other kind of benefits did they have? What challenges did they face? And were they more likely to go on another humanitarian trip again in the future if they participated on one training? And also a little bit looking at whether they were more likely to end up in a teaching environment in their practice if they had been on a humanitarian experience, although that's a little difficult to link, but we'll look over a few slides here. This paper was published in Laryngoscope Investigative Otolaryngology, and at the end of this talk, I'll put a link up to our global health page where you can download this. This is an open source This is open source. The Laryngoscope Investigative Journal is open source, so it can be posted freely under a Creative Commons license, I think. So that's available on our site. I'll put a link to that if you want to read the entire paper. And just before, I don't want to spend too much time here, but one thing that we need to codify better is what is the definition of a sustainable program. There's been some, in the global health literature, there's been some work on trying to think about what defines a sustainable program. And as we start to think about what we want to encourage doctors to do long-term in their careers, we need to think about what that means. So what does it mean? Like, what programs would be anything more than just simply a one-off where you just go on a trip for once? We want to encourage longer-term participation. We want to encourage training of local physicians on these experiences. So just a few thoughts here about what I would define as a sustainable program. One is it should be a collaborative effort between a local sort of a developed, potentially a developed nation institution and a developing nation institution. They often are in another country. It doesn't have to be, but usually they are. And they should both be consider themselves as long-term partners. There should have been more than one occasion on which they worked together, either on a for surgical reasons or for an audiological event or some other event together, such as fostering relationships with Ministry of Health in the country or otherwise. So there should have been at least 2 occasions on which these partners worked together. The effort should probably have gone on for at least 2 years, because it really takes that long to sort of allow for 2 events to have occurred. And there really shouldn't be in a humanitarian sense, there shouldn't be a reimbursement of the sort of the assisting institution and the assisted institution. So this differentiates relationships between, for example, US hospitals or academic centers with hospitals in other countries where they have like a commercial relationship or strictly educational relationship for the purposes of branding or sending physicians to do certain things in another country. We define, if there's a financial relationship with a reimbursement, for example, going on between the organizations, we would not consider that to be a humanitarian program. That would be simply a relationship between centers that's more of a commercial nature. It doesn't preclude grant funding of the project or fundraising of the project, but there should not be a direct reimbursement of one program for assisting another program from the program that's being assisted. So just put that out there as sort of a differential to think about. Excuse me. We did an IRB review. We reviewed 27 alumni of our fellowship over the time from 2006 to present, when we started doing humanitarian training in our program. And we looked at a number of things, including barriers to participation, challenges, benefits, and some other factors. So what were the benefits experienced? There's many of them. There are many. I think, if you look at some of the more common ones here, so 40% of fellows did not participate in a humanitarian experience, 60% did. And probably the higher ones here are the improved understanding of socioeconomic challenges, which is a huge benefit to going on these experiences. Positive collaboration with local surgeons, learn from collaboration from local physicians, learned innovative solutions for care in a resource-poor environment. So these are the kind of things that we want to see. These are the benefits we want the fellows to be experiencing. What are challenges? You can see that some of them, on a couple occasions, there was vacation time was required to be used, which, it's ideal if we can give protected time. The RRC didn't recognize the cases. That's another concern. Personal safety concerns, such as either civil unrest or infectious exposures. Those are, depending on what countries are involved, there can be issues there. So definitely something the person has to decide on their own and decide if they want to face that risk. In terms of whether whether a participant of a humanitarian program was more likely to do humanitarian service later. So if you look at all takers, all fellowship fellows during that time, 45% went on a post-fellow humanitarian experience. If they were a participant during fellowship, it was 54%, And if they were a non-participant, it was 33%. So there was a slight, this was not statistically significant, but we definitely see, and especially speaking to our fellows, that we definitely see that the tendency is if they've been exposed, and I think this goes beyond medical training. I think people that participate in humanitarian experiences early are much more likely to go on go later in their life. And I think the problem here also is this is a fairly limited follow-up. You know, we haven't followed these physicians through their entire careers. If we follow them through their entire careers, I think we pick up more. I get contacted by surgeons in the later stages of their career pretty regularly, you know, asking where they can participate in a humanitarian experience. And so I think as we obviously want to encourage that. I mentioned that there's a slightly higher rate of participation if they participated during fellowship, but it was not significant. And basically the conclusions of the study were, and one that I mentioned at the beginning, but Anne in the paper goes through step by step all the core competencies and shows a lot of this is actually some of the direct communication data, some of the commentary data that was given by the fellows participating in the surveys about how these core competencies were improved during through these experiences, and she breaks it down by core competency. So I think if you're interested in this, it's worth getting the paper as a download and taking a look at that as well. So what are the future steps going forward for what we'd like to accomplish? I mean, we think that humanitarian training has been valuable in our fellowship program, and we're going to continue it. Challenges include COVID, you know, any sort of world strife, civil strife in certain nations is always a challenge as well. We're developing a global otology humanitarian coordination center at House Institute. And what this will be is, we know that American Academy of Otolaryngology has tried over the years to develop a site through the Humanitarian Committee that is a database of all humanitarian experiences going on in the AAO. And I was on the Humanitarian Committee for several years and was also a consultant to the committee. It's very difficult to keep that up to date for the entire specialty. But we hope that by focusing on otology and audiology, that we can get a better handle on what projects are being done. Especially, and that's why we're interested in the definition of sustainability, because we want to make a database of programs that have been sustainable, that have been longer term in duration. And we want to allow people to go to this coordination center, find out what programs are going on, being able to contact those programs and get involved whenever they'd like. And so there's a link here where you can download both the paper from the study that we did, and also there's a link to a survey there that if you've been involved in humanitarian work, especially sustainable projects, we encourage you to go there and fill out that survey, as our goal is to develop a database. And this is something we're going to be working on over the long term. We're also developing a basic audiology tech training curriculum. The AAO has developed the CPOP program in the past for the otolaryngology tech program, the Ototechs. But we're actually going to develop our own curriculum with audiologists that would be designed for humanitarian setting, limited resource setting, to train technicians, like audiology technicians, in the basics of audiology. This is a huge need. As we talk to people around the world, it's very evident that we need trained individuals who can do basic audiological testing, and so we're developing a curriculum to do on that. This curriculum will be translated into several languages, and we hope that it will be a curriculum that can be shared, and this is also a curriculum that, once it's translated, will be able to roll out through, for example, an app on a mobile device, such as a phone or a tablet. We have in the House Institute, we're developing some other apps for audiology, as well as patient and family training, especially for parents of children with hearing impairment and also hearing impaired adults. And so we hope to tie in both an audiology tech training curriculum and other training modules into an app that can be developed and expanded. We need to further codify the definition of sustainability, because this is critical to our understanding of how we're going to define this and who should sort of be included as a functional humanitarian project. And so we're developing these criteria that I mentioned as suggestions for the definition of what's sustainable to differentiate long-term projects from one-off projects. And we're also going to, in the long term, roll out a project called tentatively called the One Otologist, One Program Initiative, where we're going to encourage every otologist, neurotologist to, in their lifetime, associate themselves with one sustainable project over the long term. Whether that's an existing sustainable project or a new one that they want to develop on their own, we're going to encourage all otologists to be involved worldwide with at least one sustainable project. And we hope that they would pick that project and be a teacher, be an assistant, be someone who travels to this project and help sustain it over the long term. And we feel that if people, what I've found, and I think others have found through their experiences of traveling humanitarian trips, is it's great to go on several trips and see different things, but the real development comes through the long-term development, the long-term friendships, the long-term partnerships that develop between surgeons in developed nations and developing nations working together over the long term. And if we couple the American surgeons with developing nations, or I mean, not just American surgeons, but just say developed nations and developing nations, the otologists there, if we partner them up early on, we can make a huge dent in the global burden of hearing loss and ear disease. And so this is something that we've talked a lot about and we feel very strongly about and hope to encourage through the development of the definition of sustainability, the coordination center, the tech training curriculum, and other initiatives that we're working on.